everybody you meet, every challenge you have, every mistake you made, every success you have is a way to grow. And if you look at leadership as a personal growth journey, all of a sudden everything is an opportunity to just live a better life.
You're listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Welcome to the No Labels, No Limits podcast, a podcast that explores how individuals transcend labels and limitations to achieve extraordinary success. And today we delve into the world of leadership and personal transformation. So we are joined by Mark J. Silverman, a distinguished executive coach and author who turned personal trials into triumphs, from overcoming homelessness and addiction to achieving multi-million-dollar sales in technology. That's a big swing. Mark's journey is a testament to the power of resilience and strategic leadership, and he's here to share insights from his latest book, The Rising Leader Handbook, and his experiences of coaching top executives. So we've got a lot to learn from Mark. So with that short introduction, let me formally welcome Mark to the podcast. Hi, Mark.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Well, I want to tell the listeners that before we even started this, you put me on the spot and asked me a great podcast question about what was interesting about you and why you should be on the podcast. So I think I kind of, in your introduction, talked about that. But I would like, if you would, let's start kind of at the place where your journey started or where you had your first kind of challenge, where you have some significant personal challenge, because it's interesting for folks to know it's not always smooth. So can you take us along your journey and maybe a few pivotal moments that helped you transform your approach to leadership?
Sure. Well, first it was transforming my approach to life before leadership ever showed up in my world. I was making a video this morning for Instagram. I walk to the gym every Thursday morning and make a video. And my video this morning, I said basically that if I didn't have the story that I have, that I was homeless and then I was a millionaire and that short Jewish Tony Robbins kind of story, like I wouldn't be invited on a lot of podcasts just for the leadership conversation. So it's really interesting to people when you have that kind of an arc. And for me, it wasn't interesting. It was my life. I didn't know the reasons for it, but alcoholism and drug addiction and sex addiction and all kinds of stuff just took over in high school. And, I never made it through my first semester of college. Wound up, partying and drinking and working in bars and having a really good time for quite a while, until I didn't. And it wasn't until I got sober. My brother was in Washington, D.C., and I was on the West Coast. And he had me drive across country to meet him to borrow some money. And he said, you can come live with me, but if you live with me, you have to go to AA meetings and NA meetings. You have to join the gym, and you got to take college classes. And I was 27 years old, and that was September 1st, 1989. And I said, well, I've got no place else to go. He owned a bunch of really famous restaurants. He had some really cool friends. So I stuck around and somehow, put days together, put weeks together, months and years, took college classes. It took me 12 years to get a college degree, which is kind of funny. I wound up, getting married, getting a professional job, having a kid before I even graduated college. It took that long, but it was that hard. But that's what happened is I got sober, and I had never done anything but waited on tables or managed my parents' restaurant. So that was all I ever knew was the restaurant business. And I was working at the Four Seasons in Georgetown, and I talked my way into a professional job there, outside the restaurant. It was the first time I ever had a job outside of a restaurant, and in accounts receivable. And I was working with computers and copy machines and fax machines. It was the first time I had ever seen a fax machine, which is kind of funny. And from there, I was trying to decide. My wife was pregnant at the time, and I was trying to figure out. I was making $26,000 a year how am I going to support a family? How am I, my ex-wife, my now ex-wife makes twice as much money as I did. How am I going to do this? So I took a survey of skills, and they said, salesman or lawyer. And I was like, I don't even have an undergraduate degree. I can't be a lawyer. So I decided to go into sales. Now the problem with that is I'm a rabid introvert, and I don't like to bother people. Right? So I'm scared of people. But somehow my relationship skills had me be really good at sales. And when I figured out sales, I doubled my income, and then I doubled my income again, and then I doubled my income again. I got a new job, and next thing I know, I'm going from homeless to waiter to I'm living in $1 million house, driving a sports car, right in Statusville, USA, and that whiplash was crazy. That was crazy. To make a few $100,000 a year when you only made 20. The most you ever made was 26. So my insides didn't match my outsides. Right? So outside, I was wearing Hugo Boss suits, and I had a solid gold watch and a sports car and $1 million house, and that was all great. Inside, I was still terrified people were going to see that homeless guy. And that was the fuel that made me successful. And that was what the video was this morning that I was talking about, is sometimes the proving yourself gets you to where you want to go. It's just unsustainable because it's like a sugar high. If you're running away from something, it's very different than if you're running towards something or walking towards something. So I was running away from that homeless guy. So about 15 years into that journey is when everything started falling apart for me with my wife. My marriage started to fall apart. We were fighting all the time. My career was going in the toilet. My health was failing. I hadn't taken a drink or a drug or done anything, and I didn't know what was going on. I was 45, 46 years old, and everything was falling apart. I know in hindsight, it was those insides not matching the outsides, and I had not done that deep work that I needed to do to be able to bring those two things together. But my life fell apart again. So I'm sitting there in an apartment around the corner from my ex-wife and my kids, trying to figure out, how did this happen? I knew if I took a drink, I would screw everything up, and I didn't do that. So how did I end up here? So what I did, I was so sick, lost a bunch of weight, and I really thought I was going to die. The doctors had misdiagnosed me with some stuff, and I was just terrified. I was depressed and suicidal. So that year, I made the decision that if I'm going to die, I'm going to do something bold for my kids. I want my kids to remember something cool. So I decided I was going to run a marathon. I heard this guy on the radio while I was waiting for a doctor's appointment saying anybody can run a marathon. Humans are bipedal. You can all, and his name is Stu Middleman, and he's an ultra marathoner. So I believed him. And this was before the internet, so I called him before Zoom and all that stuff. So I called him and I said, "Can you coach me to run the marathon?" He said, "Yeah, it'll take about 2 years." I said, "Well, I'm probably going to be dead. I have to do it in 8 months." And he said, "You can't do it in 8 months." I said, "I have to do it in 8 months." So he trained me over the phone, and he had me drinking green drinks and all kinds of stuff. Here's the interesting thing that happened. As I was training for the marathon, he had me on a specific diet. I got super healthy. Like my health came back. I got a new job as soon as I committed to the marathon. I got this new job with a great engineer who I knew for years, so my career started taking off. I started selling again. My health was going well. My kids were doing well. And the interesting thing to me was that outside of work, I think is what informs how successful you are inside of work. So I think that focus on a goal. I wanted to make $1 million and run a marathon and tell my kids those things and give $60,000 to charity. Those were my three things. And that year, I did run the marathon, and I ran an hour faster than my best time. I made the $1 million. I gave the $60,000 to charity. I did all those three things. The thing I was doing while I was training was reading every self-help book you ever heard of. I read every spiritual book. I journaled. I meditated, and I had in my ears while I was training. I was listening to all this good stuff. So at the end of the year, I was a completely new person. And it was funny because it was my ex-wife who said, I was so worried about you. I was so worried you weren't going to make it. And then when I read what you should do when you're depressed, you were doing everything right. You were doing everything you were supposed to do. So that's how this guy came up. This, you called me distinguished. Mark J. Silverman, who could actually live an adult, sane life, emerged from that. And it's been since then that I've been on a crusade like an ex-smoker. I was, looking left and right at every one of my contemporaries who were in their 40s and 50s and coming apart at the seams. They wanted life, but they have no idea. The stress is just killing them from the inside out. And I just dedicated my life to making sure that people can be successful without the cost that we seem to be willing to be paid to be in the 1%. So that's how I became a coach.
Why do you think we are willing to pay that price? What is it about us inherently? Because I'm imagining people listening thinking, oh my God, well, Mark, he could do that, of course, because he had the space to do it and he was already in the headspace to do it. But I'm still like in an environment that I can't focus on all the excuses, Mark, that can come up, right? That yes, but he can.
When I don't know when I had the time to focus on me. My ex-wife didn't work. I still supported my ex-wife, my two kids in $1 million house and an apartment. I had elderly parents I was taking care of. My dad was dying, so I was flying to Florida every 6 weeks. So yeah, I had to wrestle that time. So it's interesting because I think before we turned on the mic, you told me that certain things are really important. You being grounded and centered, having practices, and I have all those. But for me, they're not nice to haves. I have to exercise. I have to have a contemplation practice. I have to do these things because it's life and death for me. I've done 700 interviews, and I still get terrified every time I turn on the camera. Right? I've been on hundreds of stages. I still get terrified before I walk on a stage. I've coached so many people. I'm very, very successful as a coach. I meet a new client. I get nervous. It's life and death for me to eat my own dog food. When I suggest these things to people, they know that I'm doing it because it's the erector set that keeps Mark J. Silverman's life together.
You use good analogies. Erector set, dog food. Thanks. That's I'm a visual person. But then I also think about, well, of course you'd be terrified in those situations. You didn't change or stop being an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So your natural inclination isn't going to be, hey, let's go hang on a stage in front of all these thousands of people and feel great, right?
I still do. When I come off stage, I still do run away. Like, Mark, come have lunch with us. And
no, I need to recharge. Thanks. Yeah.
It's hilarious.
It's good to acknowledge that, though, and not make it feel weird that you need that space to recharge and come back into yourself when you've just poured out all of this to other people.
That comes with being in my 60s, right? I totally I accept myself. I accept the fact that I sweat on stage. That I get nervous. It's fine. Like if I haven't beaten it out of myself by now, what's the difference, right? And I'm starting. I finally learned that loving myself and loving my quirks and loving my shortcomings are the way through. Because I spent decades trying to beat them out of me, and it didn't work.
No, and when I can kind of I see, like, I'll notice, I'm thinking, Sarah, that's just the wackiest thing ever. And I'll be laughing. And my husband's going, I says, well, I don't want to tell you what I just did because it's a little embarrassing. But he says, but you're laughing. I says, well, it's funny, there was a time in my life that I wouldn't want to even let anybody know. It's like that was dumb. So, but let's talk then, because you went on to write this book, the Rising Leader Handbook, and you talk about turning high achievers into effective leaders. Now, those are two different things. You can be a high achiever and an effective leader. Are they exclusive of one another?
Not at all, but often the high achievers get promoted real fast. And and because they're so good at what they do, they don't learn the leadership that, because now their job is different. When you get on a senior leadership team, your job is no longer to do it's success through others. Right now your job is learning leadership skills. Your job is learning people. But people who are super talented often, they haven't really worked on those skills. So I generally get called, and the book is specifically my coaching process with my clients. So I love the uncoachable. I love the people who are the mavericks, who are just so super talented. Why do I need to care how people feel about things? Why do I have to play these politic games? And it's again, for me, it's bread and butter. You take a high achiever and you put them on a senior leadership team where you have other high achievers and powerful people who all have agendas, who all have ideas, who all want to be seen. How do you lead on a group of people who are all A players? That vexes a lot of people. That vexed me. So teaching people how to lead and be a team player at the same time. How do you become a trusted advisor? How do you not drive your CEO crazy if you're a problem solver and you just see problems everywhere when the CEO has 12 people on their team who also see problems and all that? How do you pick and choose your time? So how do you get to be trusted by that person? And then how do you lead your team? Which, there's tons and tons of trainings on how to lead a team properly, but not a lot on how to lead across. And for me, the most important thing is I use every single interaction that my clients or the reader has to grow them. So everybody you meet, every challenge you have, every mistake you made, every success you have is a way to grow. And if you look at leadership as a personal growth journey, all of a sudden everything is an opportunity to just live a better life.
So I just had an interesting conversation with someone who's very near and dear to my heart and one of the best leaders, just both on an inspirational and tactical and strategical place, right? But their organization has grown. So that tipping point, right, where everybody can be tight and quick, and it's almost like everybody knows what the other people are thinking, just because you're in proximity, you don't have to talk about it and stuff. And we had an interesting conversation, and that's one of the things she's talking about is I need to change. I'm not sure what. So we're going to have deeper conversations about it. And as I listen to her, it's a lot of what you're talking about is it's not the people thing. It's that now her role is different. She can't be the one, right? The one. And even though she has competent folks. So I'm thinking about the next down from her, from potentially reluctant leaders who compare themselves to her, right? But they have full authority, So does this work, or how would you start with that team, if you will? If you were going to talk with them or with her helping them, what might be a place to start that conversation?
So forgive me because I don't understand I don't understand the specific.
So the specifics are, it's been a small organization, relatively small budget. They've done super well on. But now they're getting dispersed and they've brought on other staff, some vendors, some contractors, right? But people are used to going to the top or being able to informally just drop in, right? Now the other team members are responsible. And it's that growth place where people go, well, I always used to have to go and check in when you don't have to. You are the boss of you or your realm. So it's almost growing that confidence piece in leaders, whether they're at the top or on, like, if you'd call them the C-suite leaders. But I've watched this particular organization over the years, and they grow and they step up to the challenges, but there's just that tentativeness about, like, I don't want to ultimately be the quote unquote leader.
Right. You guys, so again, the first thing is to identify those people who are the people who want to step into that. Leadership is terrifying. It's so scary. The responsibility, the difficult conversations that you need to have. The fact that the buck stops with you, it's so much better when you can just, take shots at the people who are in charge for making all the wrong decisions all the time. So one of the things I teach people is when you move from middle management to the senior leadership team, you are now them. You're no longer like it's us against them. You're now them. You now speak with one voice. So when you're in the boardroom and a decision is made, even if you disagree with it, when you leave, you no longer say to your people, I fought for this, and this is, it's, I think, a different thing. You are now lockstep with the CEO and with the leadership team. So it's a cultural thing first. So Gary Ridge, who was the former CEO of WD-40, he gave, and like they sell stuff that fixes squeaks, and it's considered one of the best companies in the entire world to work for. One of the reasons was because of this culture that Gary created, and everybody had full autonomy to make decisions. But what he did was he had a set of values that everybody adhered to. Everybody understood the values of the organization, and he said, if you ever make a decision that is within the values of the organization and it's the wrong decision, you will never get in trouble. Right? So you give those guardrails. Now, I'm not saying that's the perfect way to do it. She would have to set her culture and her parameters on how you make decisions. Some hotel chains say that any employee can make a decision up to $250 or up to $500 to rectify a situation. You will never get in trouble for spending $500 to fix a customer, a guest who had a problem. So she has to figure out what it is that she wants and then make that the cultural norm.
Great. Thank you for that little bit of side coaching. I want to talk, though, about, you wrote this book for where people are at. Was there a common, or are there a handful of common challenges that you notice when you start working with folks?
Mm-hmm. So, I noticed the episode before, your last episode was on Enneagram.
With Nyan.
Yeah, so that was, I use Enneagram in my coaching. I'm a certified Enneagram coach. And I do the Enneagram test for everybody. So every personality type has a different motivation, a different blind spot, and a different fear. And when you figure out what the blind spot is, what the motivation is, and what the fear is, now you can see what potholes they're gonna fall into. So an achiever is going to be even keeled. They're gonna be your racehorse. They're gonna get things done. But where they're going to falter is if something looks like they're going to fail or they're going to look bad, right? So I basically say every single type has something that's going to make them lose their shit and no longer be a team player. They're no longer going to be at their best. An active controller is if they feel out of control, they're going to lose it, right? Me, I'm a happy helper. If I don't feel like I'm presenting value, I'm going to take myself out. So you find out where people have that it's a childhood fear that presents itself in a business setting, and when you start to see those and you put those out front, then you know how to start to talk to people. So it's either people are a bull in a china closet, and they're drivers, they're go-getters, and they just have collateral damage everywhere, or they don't speak up, they're timid, they're how many times have I heard, so-and-so is the smartest person in the organization. If I can just get her to speak up in the leadership meetings, that would be so helpful, Mark. Can you do that? So having people, getting the other people, then there's the micromanager, right? They're the person who just stays in the weeds because they were so good at it that that's where their level of competency is, that's where their comfort level is, so they stay in the weeds. So it's always something like that to kind of pry their hands off of that so that they can elevate to become this, again, a leader is someone who shows up the way their people need them to show up. So you have to have that range. So when you go from a high achiever to a leader, it's expanding your range. You can be analytical when you need to be analytical. You can be forceful when you need to be forceful. You can be vulnerable when you can be vulnerable. And as you learn those skills, and nobody comes out the womb that way. Nobody, it takes practice to learn to be more of those things to more people.
Yeah. And it takes intention. Well, it was interesting, and I was actually working with a couple of gals on this. They're a part of a leadership team, and we were talking about them and how they show up, and their goal was to communicate better with the folks they're responsible for. And so we just talked at some high-level things about like what activates them, right? But when we came back together, this gal said, oh man, I see so many opportunities to have had better conversations with people, right? Not because we talked about those people, but because we talked about her, right? And her willingness to look at that. And so I love the perspective that you bring, that the leader has to be the person who takes responsibility for that, to lead. So, we talked briefly, you and I, about being grounded and centered. And could you talk about how that principle has helped you? I know you talked a bit about it here, about it. It's you have to do that for you. But can we go into a little more detail about what that looks like for you, so people might get some ideas about, oh, I see how Mark does it. That might apply to me.
Sure. So I'm a really smart person. One of the reasons I was able to pull myself out of the predicament I was in is I'm smart. I'm articulate. I think quickly. But when I'm thrown off my game, I'm an idiot. So again, I didn't know that I go to networking meetings and I didn't know how to talk to people because I was a nervous wreck, and my voice would be up high and I would be, just talking too fast, until someone said, oh, take a deep breath before you walk in, ground yourself, have 3 questions ready for people, be interested in them. And then my voice would lower and my manner would slow down. Now I didn't need any more skills for networking, right? They didn't have to tell me how to talk to people. I just settled in. So I tell my clients all the time, I said, we can play whack-a-mole with your behaviors, or you're really smart. We can get you to grounded and centered. The person who's grounded and centered in any meeting has the power. If we can get you grounded, centered, and present, 9 times out of 10, you're going to know the right things to say. You're going to know the way to respond. It's going to be intuitive. Yes, we can work on skills. We can work on language. But if we get you to learn how to kind of just bring it in, everything changes. I was just working with an Enneagram 3. He's a high achiever, super good looking, unbelievably like 6'4", 6'5", and intimidating to everybody. And my job was, to kind of humanize him. And I just got a report back from the HR person who who kind of gave me the lay of the land of why people didn't like him. A lot of it was projection, right? He was just too tall, too good looking. I looked like a lot of it wasn't even his problem. So I'm coaching him and I'm working with him. I'm like, this guy is a sweetheart. He is so loving and so kind and everything. And I taught him how to be present in conversations, because an achiever, their ego, their automatic will show up, right? And they will go for the task rather than the relationship. But when he's present, he goes for the relationship and the task. So I just got him to be present. The feedback I got was, Mark, the changes in him are amazing. And most of all, everybody believes them. And that was the piece that I loved. We could get people to pretend to like people. We can get them to pretend to do the behaviors that I was hired to give them, or they can be real. And most people are kind and loving and caring when they're present. It's when they're in their automatic that yep. The problems happen. So every time I can get someone to be grounded and centered, everything else is easier.
Do you have a particular practice that you like to do, Mark, to help people get there?
It's really complicated and it takes years to practice. It's breathing from your belly.
You are so funny.
And wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers. Like, just take a deep breath, feel your toes, find the color blue in the room, and just be here. And it just happens like that.
And you can reground you. I mean, if that's all you're doing, right, and you're in the middle of a meeting and you get triggered, it's so easy to just go blue, fingers, toes.
Right? If you get triggered in a meeting, that's actually one of the tricks in a meeting. If you get triggered in a meeting, find the color green in the room. Look for all the places the color green, and your everything will just kind of lower, so that when it comes your time to talk, even though you're triggered, you'll have your wits about you.
Which is good. Then you don't have to apologize and go back and clean up the mess you left.
Right.
I was like, I don't know who that was. I'm pretty sure it wasn't me. But no, but it's true. It's those little tiny things. People go, well, duh. But when you are in that space where all of a sudden you're triggered, your heart rate goes up, you can feel it in your body. And to just have that coaching go, look for green, toes, fingers, look for green, more green, more green, right? It starts to deregulate or calm down your nervous system. And sometimes it's just enough for you to go, is it time for me to add to this conversation or not? And be able to think. So as we're wrapping this up, I want to ask a couple more questions. And you talked about being grounded. I want you to give me, if you would, an example of when you had to use that in a high stakes environment.
Oh, all right. We'll get vulnerable here. So when October 7th happened in Israel and the hostages were taken and temperatures were really high, I raised my kids in a very observant Jewish fashion, even though I'm not. They're very identified with their Jewish identity, and my sons are both heroes. Like they both, if someone needs help, if someone needs protecting, both my sons will show up. One of them is a Hasidic rabbi, and October 7th happened, and they needed volunteers to come to Israel to work jobs that the reservists were, not to go fight, but to go just work jobs that the reservists were leaving to end. It was Thanksgiving, and my son and I were walking, and he said, "Dad, I'm gonna go over to Israel and volunteer." And my younger son, my rabbi son, he says, "Dad, you're Yoda most of the time, but when you talk about politics, you lose your shit." And this was one of those moments. Just terror, absolute. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know had no idea. And this was my firstborn son. So I breathed, and I knew anything I said was going to be so important and so pivotal. And we were walking the dogs, and I was breathing, and I wasn't saying anything. And I was just eating my own dog food again, breathing, and just, you're scared. And he said, "You're mad at me." I said, "No, I'm not mad at you at all. I'm scared." And then we walked a little bit longer, and I'm just like, "Mark, you have to be here for your son." I said, "I'm scared." I said, "Zach, I love that you care. I love that you're brave and that you are willing to put yourself in harm's way to help people you care about. I love that about you. Here's the reasons I'm scared. I don't know if they're rational or not. And you're an adult. You can do what you need to do. And I will ask you to not do that, to not go. Find someplace in this country to help. If you want to be of service, there's plenty of things you can do from here. There's plenty of things you can do for people here. Can you do that?" And he wound up making the decision to stay home. And then afterwards, I was so proud of myself because the level of trigger I was in, the level of absolute panic I was in, there was no way I was going to be able to have a rational conversation. So I took the time I needed so that I didn't do any damage. I communicated that. I said, "Look, dude, I'm just give me a couple of minutes to deal with my fear, and then we can have a conversation." And it was great. He got acknowledged. He got loved. I said what I needed and wanted. Well, basically, I did say, "If you go, it will kill me. Please do not do this."
Well, you have a little incentive for listening to you. And they did mention you lose your shit when you at certain times, so that's okay to throw that in. But how respectful of your son to approach it that way, though, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Just to recognize his heart and all that was driving that for him, and your own fear. Even when you brought that up, and I'm not related to you, I don't know your children, but my stomach clutched. I went, oh my God, that was so tumultuous at that time. We knew nothing about
Yeah.
what
He said, Dad, the world is safer than it's ever been. I said, yes. And you want to fly to the exact place where it's not safe.
So much for your statistics. That doesn't apply there.
Yeah, it doesn't apply. So, yes.
Oh, man.
So, yes, I absolutely have to do, again, have to work. Everybody, needs to work on themselves. None of us are, robots. None of us, very few of us are, Zen Master Flash. Like it takes work to have intelligent, grounded, connected conversations.
Well, and to your point, like when we're talking about the Enneagram, everybody has the things they're afraid of from being really young. And we can go a long time without those being triggered. But when they get triggered, we go right back to being young. And it takes intention and practice, like you were saying. My husband used to tell me, blue, that's the code word, blue. And I thought it was silly, but it really works.
Yes.
It's like, look for blue. It's all good. And it's something you can say to someone that other people don't know anything about. You could say, hey, I was thinking we should paint the room blue. Blue, I got it. Okay, I'm spinning, right? So but that's such an amazing story of that interaction with you and your son. Thank you for sharing that. That is vulnerable.
Sure.
Well, okay, I'm going to ask you, you've offered a free copy of your book, Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life.
Yeah, only tens. Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life. You go to my website. You can either get an electronic copy or a hard copy free. I go to the post office once a week, and I love throwing copies into the mailbox. That's so fun.
Sweet. Well, so we'll put that in the show notes. So folks who want a copy, it's on you, listener, to go there, go to the website and request one. And he only does 10. So, but I think that might be a good starting place. And Mark, I want to give you the opportunity to take us out of the podcast and leave us with something you want us all to remember.
The thing that I didn't know my whole life that I learned was that I was loved and that I was worthwhile. It wasn't until my 50s that I learned that I was okay the way I am, that I had intrinsic value. Not for what I did, not for what I contributed to people, but just because I'm here. And that's my mission in life, is for people to know that they're worthwhile and they're loved and they're valuable. That's what I want people to know. From there, then you can grow. From there, you can make changes. From there, you can strive for things. But the starting point is intrinsic value.
Thank you, Mark. And folks, we'll see you next week. Honestly, I can feel a shift in me from just listening to you today, Mark, and it feels good. So I want to thank you for that.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic business coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Till next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.